In a room cluttered with enough books to cause a structural collapse, a master instructed his young student to memorize every text describing creatures before the day ended. The girl, looking utterly exhausted by the academic grind, meekly agreed to her master's demands. The text spoke of a brutal age of war involving men and beasts, illustrated by drawings of creatures that looked like they desperately needed a skincare routine. This girl, an orphan adopted by soldiers, endured training sessions so harsh they would make a drill sergeant weep. She practiced swordplay against armored knights and shot arrows at straw dummies with the intensity of someone who really hated scarecrows. All of this was to prepare her to become humanity's shield against monster hordes. She counted her sword swings and did push-ups until her arms felt like jelly, pushing her body to the absolute limit. Finally, the day arrived for her first battle. Standing before the castle, she vowed to her liege that she would not disappoint him, likely while trying to ignore her trembling legs. Inside the throne room, Sora knelt before the king, dramatically declaring she would fulfill her duty as the avenging blade of humanity against the invading monster horde. She was introduced as the kingdom's mightiest monster slayer, to be a title that felt a little premature given she hadn't actually slain anything yet. The king, looking slightly uncomfortable, admitted that what he was about to say might come as a surprise, which is rarely a good sign when you are expecting a quest. With a look of sheer shock on Sora's face, the king announced he was relieving her of her duty. He explained that monsters were no longer a threat to humanity, leaving Sora to utter a confused pardon. It turned out the monsters had simply given up on invading, presumably because they found a better hobby like knitting or baking. The king declared that instead of war, the day would be a celebration of peace, leaping into the air with the enthusiasm of a man who just canceled a meeting. Sora stood there, processing the word, peace, as if it were a foreign language she hadn't studied. She asked her liege what would become of her duty now. The king confirmed that her specific duty of slaying monsters was indeed obsolete because the war was over and peace had finally arrived. He held her by the shoulders, gently explaining that there was no longer any need for blood to be spilled, effectively telling the girl who trained her entire life for violence that she was now professionally unemployed. The king informed Sora that she was free to do as she wished and that her life was now hers to live. Sora murmured the word peace, looking completely bewildered by the concept. The king advised her to make friends, find a family, and be happy, leaving Sora standing there with swirling eyes, realizing she had absolutely no idea how to do any of those things. Sora walked away from the castle with a bag slung over her shoulder, tasked with building a home of her own, which was a tall order for someone whose primary skill set involved hitting things with sharp objects. As Sora walked along a path, she reflected on how her duty had been stripped away in the blink of an eye. She realized with a heavy heart that she had no friends and no family to speak of. The sky stretched out above her as she acknowledged that her life, until now, had been spent entirely in training. With the war officially over, Sora looked down at her bandaged hand, realizing she was essentially a weapon with no war to fight, like a toaster in a world that only eats cereal. Sora sat by a small campfire in the woods, wondering just where home was supposed to be for someone like her. She continued her journey, walking toward a large mountain and climbing rocky cliffs under the moonlight. She paused, looking alert, as she traversed the landscape, still searching for a place to belong. Sora arrived in a snowy, rocky area dotted with cave entrances. The wind howled around her. She peered into a dark opening, questioning if it was indeed a cave. Deciding she had no other choice, she resolved to sleep there for the night. Suddenly, she sensed something approaching and dashed forward, her eyes widening in alertness as she prepared for a confrontation, because old habits die hard and she really needed something to hit. 3 figures emerged from the snow, a large dwarf carrying a massive drill, a small dwarf, and a female dwarf holding a pickaxe. Sora stared at them, recalling her textbook knowledge that dwarves were short humanoid creatures known for smithing and crafting in the monster world. She realized with shock that she was looking at an actual dwarf. The dwarves expressed relief that they had finally made it to their destination, looking none too pleased to see a human soldier, probably assuming she was there to critique their lack of personal space. Outside a snowy cave entrance, a group of goblins told a small figure to wait, noting they had been waiting a long time. These goblins were described as rough, violent, and tribal creatures, though they were also considered one of the weakest monster races, which explained why they looked like they were trying very hard to compensate. One goblin looked down at the diminutive dwarf and questioned if he was really the one they called the monster architect, doubting someone so small could build anything larger than a dollhouse. Sora stood nearby, her eyes widening in shock as she processed the title monster architect, realizing the dwarf she had encountered was a professional in monster real estate. The dwarf, identified as Crick, ignored the goblin's doubts and marched into the cave to take a look inside. Sora watched from the entrance as Crick inspected the interior, his expression stern. The goblins inside the cave looked on with nervous expressions, sweating profusely as if they knew their interior design choices were about to be harshly critiqued. Crick walked through the cavern, observing the jagged rocks and dark corners, before declaring that the structure was too poorly constructed to even be called a house, effectively giving the goblins a failing grade in home economics. An architecture file labeled Number 1 appeared, detailing the dark, narrow cavern habitat. It explained that goblins originally lived in warm climates, but were chased into snowy mountains after losing the war with humans, eventually becoming a sub-race called snow goblins. These creatures were described as clumsy by nature with inferior intelligence, living in a primitive fashion. The habitat itself was built inside a naturally formed cavern carved into the rock wall over a long time, supposedly to be easy to live in, though it looked more like a dental cavity. The file noted that humidity was high due to bad ventilation. There was only one torch to illuminate the whole cavern, and the low temperature forced inhabitants to carve smaller holes in the rocks to sleep in, while leftover bones were scattered all over, making it a cozy home for anyone who loved tetanus and hypothermia. The reasons for renovation were then listed, highlighting other problems in the habitat. Sharp and dangerous rock surfaces were identified as a major issue, as the hard rocks were a constant danger to the inhabitants. Many goblins possessed injuries not from battle, but from simply bumping into their own walls, proving that their house was essentially a weaponized obstacle course. Poor lighting was also cited as a problem. While goblins might prefer dark areas, the lack of proper illumination meant visibility was extremely poor, making it difficult to move around without tripping over their own feet or each other, turning their daily commute into a game of blind man's bluff. The goblins were naturally clumsy creatures, and their lack of a proper storage area didn't help matters at all. Their flooring was a chaotic mosaic of leftover food, scattered bones, and various kinds of rubbish, making it a health inspector's absolute nightmare. To make matters worse, the outside air flowing in combined with temperature differences caused water to condense inside the cavern. This turned the habitat into a constantly humid swamp that was difficult for the inhabitants to breathe in, essentially turning their home into a natural sauna they definitely didn't ask for. The goblins argued that the cave was too dark to see anything, only to immediately contradict themselves by admitting they actually preferred living in the dark, proving their logic was as sturdy as their architecture. Crick declared that the survey covered everything. He explained that their job was simply to fix the problems with the home, and they would keep anything the goblins wanted, which was a relief since the goblins probably wanted to keep their pile of bones. A goblin agreed with a simple affirmation. Sora gasped in shock at the mention of materials. Crick announced that it was time to prepare the necessary materials for the renovation, ignoring Sora's growing confusion. The dwarves got to work immediately. One dwarf chopped wood with incredible speed, while another carried a massive bundle of timber on his back, moving with the efficiency of a forklift made of muscle. In no time, a gigantic pile of construction materials appeared, including logs, bricks, ladders, and mysterious rolled-up items, ready for the project. A burly dwarf with a cigarette hanging from his mouth announced that they were all ready, boss. A female dwarf with horns shouted the same sentiment with enthusiastic energy. Crick gripped his hammer and shouted for his lads to begin, signaling the start of the demolition phase with the enthusiasm of a kid with a new toy. The dwarf team charged into the cave with reckless abandon, screaming that it was time to get building, treating the renovation like a high-speed raid. One of the dwarves casually tossed a bomb into the entrance. The explosion rocked the area, sending debris flying everywhere. The entire goblin cave erupted in a massive explosion, completely obliterating the structure in seconds. A dwarf swung on a rope through the dust cloud, yelling for everyone to bring the materials in. Sora stood there with her jaw dropped, utterly horrified. A dwarf cheerfully announced that the area was cleared. Crick stood amidst the rubble with his hammer. Sora realized with dawning horror that they hadn't renovated the cave. They had completely destroyed the goblin's home, proving that sometimes the best way to fix a house is to erase it from existence. The dwarf team went to work with terrifying efficiency. Crick hammered beams into place while his comrades sawed wood, hauled lumber, and scaled scaffolding with the agility of squirrels on caffeine. They constructed a massive wooden framework in record time, proving that dwarven construction crews don't need blueprints, just raw enthusiasm and heavy hammers. Half a day later, the project was finished. The result was the 30,000-year-old magic tree house. It was a colossal structure featuring a domed base adorned with spikes and skulls, topped by a massive, ancient tree covered in snow. It looked less like a house and more like a fortress designed by a very artistic warlord, completed in less time than it takes most people to assemble flat, pack furniture. The detailed architecture revealed the house was built around a rare, cold, resistant magic tree found deep in the monster world. The rock walls of the original cavern served as the foundation, protecting inhabitants from extreme climates. The outer walls were creatively covered in rocks and the previously scattered bones, giving it a rustic, bony aesthetic that really tied the room together. Inside, the first floor boasted a living room, bathroom, storage, fireplace, and a big dinner table, while the second floor served as the bedroom. A spiral staircase wound around the magic tree, connecting the levels. It was a 5-star hotel compared to the moldy hole they had before. Sora stood in disbelief, wondering how they had accomplished such a feat in mere hours. Meanwhile, the goblins were wailing in despair, mourning their dark, damp cave where they had grown up. They screamed that the dwarf had destroyed their ancestral home and charged at Crick in a rage. Crick calmly deflected their attacks, telling the angry mob to check the inside before they started criticizing his work, likely knowing they wouldn't understand quality craftsmanship when it hit them in the face. The goblins peeked inside and were stunned. The desolate entrances and holes were gone, replaced by a big, welcoming living room. The rough, jagged rock floor that used to slice their feet had been replaced by shiny, smooth wooden flooring. Crick explained that they used spring wood flooring, gathered from the wetlands of the monster world. He noted that its elasticity and shock-absorbing capabilities made it ideal for flooring, adding that it was safe even for elderly goblins, which was a relief since they seemed prone to tripping over their own shadows. The goblins bounced on the newly installed floor with the enthusiasm of kangaroos on a trampoline, cheering that they no longer had to fear tripping over rocks. They marveled at how nice and bouncy the surface was, effectively turning their home into a giant, wooden bounce house. Crick, standing amidst the jumping monsters, dryly noted that the floor would only stay clean if someone cleaned it up. He pointed out that goblins were not in the habit of cleaning after themselves and that he had no doubt they would scatter rubbish all over the floor the moment he left. As if on cue, a monstrous, hairy plant burst from the floorboards, growling as it lunged at a pile of trash. The creature, a carpet of carnivorous plant life, crunched down on bones and rubbish with terrifying efficiency. Crick explained to the horrified goblins that the flooring was covered in a carpet made of this specific plant. He identified the creature as the Gojelmba, a parasitic demonic plant that survived by devouring anything close to it. Fortunately for the goblins, the plant was cowardly by nature and refused to target larger, living creatures, making it the ultimate self-cleaning rug that judged your hygiene but wouldn't eat your feet. The goblins cheered that they no longer had to worry about dirty floors or big pointy rocks in the walls. However, their joy was short-lived as they immediately found new problems to complain about. They whined that the house was still too dark to see and that the cold wind from outside was making water stick to the walls again, proving that goblins were experts at finding the silver lining in a cloud of misery. Crick calmly assured them that he had considered that problem as well. With a dramatic flourish, Crick revealed his solution. He caused water to defy gravity, sending it flying upward in a swirling vortex. Sora watched with wide, swirling eyes, completely baffled as the water floated into the air. The water didn't just fly aimlessly, it flew directly into the trunk of the massive magic tree that served as the home centerpiece. As the tree absorbed the moisture, it began to glow, emitting sparkling particles of light that drifted through the room. The goblins stared in awe, their mouths hanging open as light suddenly filled every corner of the cavern. Crick wore a smug grin, satisfied that his magical plumbing had not only solved the dampness issue but also turned the house into a brilliantly lit disco ball powered by tree juice. The diagram detailed the automatic illumination system. The magic tree absorbed the condensed water inside the house on its own, causing its leaves to glow brightly, effectively turning a damp problem into a free light bill. The goblins basked in the soft glow, remarking that it was soothing and calm, much preferable to the previous option of stubbing their toes in the dark. Inside the cozy new home, which featured actual beds and shelves, the goblins cheered that they finally had a proper dwelling. They hailed Crick as the true monster architect, a title he accepted with the quiet pride of a contractor who finished a job without going over budget. The goblins celebrated their new lease on life with chaotic joy, climbing the massive tree and jumping around the glowing interior. Crick watched over his handiwork, satisfied that his aggressive renovation strategy had resulted in a happy client base, even if they looked like they were about to break the furniture. Sora watched the scene from the shadows, her eyes wide with confusion. Her gaze drifted to a nearby human settlement where a father called his family inside for a warm meal. Through a window, she saw a human family embracing and laughing, a scene of domestic bliss that starkly contrasted with her own lonely existence. She stood outside in the cold, realizing that home usually involved less stabbing and more hugging, a concept entirely foreign to her. Sora's shock quickly curdled into outrage. She couldn't comprehend a home built for monsters. Bursting into the treehouse, she drew her sword and declared that monsters were savage beings who only knew how to steal and destroy, conveniently ignoring the fact that she was currently the one kicking down their door. The goblins were startled by the intrusion. One goblin demanded to know who she was, while another snarled that humans were their enemy, proving that monsters and humans still had some serious communication issues to work out. Crick stared at Sora with a stern, unimpressed look, while Sora sweated nervously, realizing she might have overreacted to the interior decorating. The two stood facing each other in the snow outside, the monster slayer and the monster architect locked in a tense standoff, proving that peace was still a work in progress and that not everyone appreciated open, concept living. The newly constructed goblin's house stood proudly against the snowy backdrop, a testament to dwarven engineering. Crick, the monster architect, confronted the intruder, Sora, noting that it was quite rare to see one of her kind in these lands. He demanded to know exactly what she wanted with the house, looking as intense as a teacher catching a student cheating on a test. Sora realized with a start that she had been spotted. Gansho and Nico, the other dwarves, stepped forward to back up their boss. Gansho mused that he thought the war between humans and monsters was already over, while Nico questioned what could possibly bring a human all the way up there. They stood ready with their tools, looking like a construction crew that was fully prepared to switch to demolition mode if necessary. Sora, realizing her carelessness in not noticing their approach, drew her sword with a sharp ring of steel. She decided that before these creatures could touch a single hair on her head, they would have to die. She launched into an attack with the enthusiasm of someone who really needed a stress reliever, screaming that they shall die. Suddenly, Sora paused, her eyes widening in confusion. The goblins inside the house were not attacking. They were shivering violently, chattering their teeth in unison. Sora wondered why the goblins were trembling. Crick and the dwarves suddenly realized their mistake, shouting that they had forgotten about the cold air coming from the floor. Crick explained that during the overall renovation, they had installed the carnivorous plant carpet to help the goblins clean up their rubbish and leftover food. However, they had forgotten that the rubbish pile had another function besides being gross. The old pile of bones and trash had actually been acting as insulation, blocking the vertical flow of cold air from the ground. By cleaning everything up and installing the nice wood floor, they had essentially removed the goblins' only heater, leaving them to freeze on their fancy new flooring. The goblins huddled together in a shivering pile, their primitive tribalistic pride preventing them from wearing clothes, leaving them utterly unprepared for the freezing temperature. Crick calmly instructed his crew not to panic, explaining that renovation always involved dealing with new problems as they arose. He declared that they would need that thing, gesturing toward a distant, snow-covered mountain peak that looked like a giant scoop of vanilla ice cream. The dwarf team scrambled up the treacherous, icy cliff face with the urgency of people who realized they had accidentally turned off the heating in a walk-in freezer. Crick urged them to move faster, knowing they had to secure the necessary item before the goblins froze into statues. They finally reached the summit, panting in the thin air. Sora, confused by the monster's lack of fleeing, followed them up the mountain, wondering what suicidal plan they could possibly be hatching. She decided she could not leave non-humans to their own devices, proving that stalking is a universal language. As she crested the ridge, Crick turned around and asked why she was following them, displaying the situational awareness of a brick. Sora landed with a dramatic pose, shouting that she was there to keep watch over them and demanding they not feign innocence. She screamed that all non-humans posed a threat just by existing, which was a bold statement to make while wearing a cape in a blizzard. Nico muttered that humans were bloody racists with their stereotypes. Crick admitted it was a historical fact that monsters once sought to invade human lands to steal and destroy, but noted that you couldn't blame Sora for her prejudice, which was basically the diplomatic equivalent of a shrug. The history of the conflict was laid bare, illustrating hordes of skeletons, ogres, and demons rising again and again, no matter how many times they were pushed back. Humans were shown clashing with the undead armies, highlighting that the war had been an endless cycle of respawn buttons and sword fights, leaving everyone equally exhausted. The monsters were shown attacking a human castle under a full moon, but one day, they noticed something. They looked at the human settlements and realized that humans possessed something monsters seemed to lack entirely, which was apparently not just better dental hygiene, but actual real estate. The monsters gazed upon the human homes with starry eyes, screaming that they were wonderful. Crick was on his knees, overcome with emotion, gushing about the diversity of buildings and the ingenuity within each one. He described every human house as a unique, polished gem and admitted he got goosebumps just thinking about it, proving that for a dwarf, a well-constructed roof is more exciting than a dragon horde. Sora watched him with a confused expression, wondering if he had hit his head on a low beam. Crick explained that he could hear the despair in the monsters' voices, as they lived in places barely worthy of being called homes, merely seeking shelter from the wind and rain. Sora accused them of wanting to steal human homes for that reason. Crick reminded her that the war was over and they were long past the age of killing and stealing. Gansho and Nico explained that most monsters would rather rebuild their own habitats than risk their lives stealing. Gansho passionately declared that no happiness is better than when you build something yourself, effectively turning the invasion into a home improvement show. Sora stood there, her worldview cracking faster than the ice they were about to climb. Under the banner of "Do It Yourself," Crick stood atop a snowy peak, holding a pickaxe. He told Sora they must hurry and bid her farewell, telling her to do it herself. Sora was left sputtering in confusion. Undeterred, she continued to follow the dwarves, shouting that it was an order and demanding they stop, acting like a hall monitor chasing kids who were just trying to get to recess. Hours later, the chase continued up the mountain. They arrived at Ice Pick's peak. Nico tested the ground and noted that it would take more strength than expected to crack through the ice. Gansho agreed it would take quite a bit of effort. Crick observed that the ice was particularly thick there, setting the stage for some serious manual labor and proving that even magical renovations require a lot of elbow grease. The dwarf trio wasted no time and began frantically digging into the frozen peak, their tools striking the hard surface with rhythmic intensity. Sora watched them, bewildered by their sudden excavation efforts, and demanded to know why they were digging through the mountain. Crick explained that they needed to retrieve something buried deep beneath the ice. When Sora pressed for details on what that something was, Crick casually asked her to lend a hand, assuming that since she had nothing better to do, she might as well help. Sora, affronted by the request to assist a bunch of non-humans, retorted with indignation. The dwarves, realizing their mistake, quickly backpedaled, claiming they only asked because they thought she looked bored, before immediately undermining her by wondering what a mere human girl could possibly accomplish. Insulted and radiating a dark aura of fury, Sora refused to be belittled by the short miners. She told them to step aside and charged forward, unleashing a powerful strike that shattered the frozen ground. The dwarves gasped in shock at her strength, realizing she had smashed through the ice in a single blow. However, the impact triggered a rumbling from deep within the mountain. Sora paused, noticing a strange sound coming from the cracks she had made, while the dwarves screamed in panic as the mountain began to quake violently. Suddenly, the peak erupted, sending a massive stream of magma flowing down the mountainside. Sora stood frozen in shock as the volcanic activity threatened to engulf them. The dwarves, however, didn't flee. Instead, Crick shouted orders, identifying the eruption as exactly what they needed. He commanded his lads to dig a stream for the magma, turning a natural disaster into a construction resource. The team immediately set to work, channeling the lava with the precision of plumbers handling a very hot pipe, proving that for a dwarf, a volcanic eruption is just an opportunity for central heating. Sora watched in disbelief as the dwarves frantically dug a path for the magma flowing down the mountain behind them. Crick shouted orders to keep moving without stopping, leading his team as they carved a channel for the lava to follow. The trio ran for their lives, digging furiously to direct the flow downward, proving that running away from lava is the ultimate cardio workout. Inside the goblin house, the monsters were on the verge of freezing, complaining that the cold was too much to bear. Suddenly, the floor began to radiate heat, causing a goblin to scream in surprise as warmth spread through the wood. Another goblin leaped into the air, rejoicing that the floor was warm and that he could finally feel his limbs again, which was a significant improvement over being a frozen popsicle. Crick stood at the doorway, watching his plan succeed as the goblins celebrated their newfound thermal comfort. Crick explained to the goblins that their house should feel a little warmer now. The goblins marveled at the sensation, feeling the heat spreading across their entire bodies, realizing they no longer needed to huddle together for survival. Crick revealed that the nearby mountain was actually an inactive volcano frozen by snow, but they had managed to force an eruption with enough strength, proving that dwarves can wake up a volcano just by hitting it hard enough. A diagram illustrated the magma stream flowing from the volcano towards the house and into an underground cavern beneath it. Crick narrowed his eye, declaring that as a result of their efforts, the setup was complete. The final diagram revealed the floor heating system, a natural heating mechanism where the magma flowing in the cavern below warmed the floor of the tree house above, effectively turning the volcano into a giant, geothermal radiator for the goblins. A detailed diagram explained the mechanics of the floor heating system. By using the magma to heat the underground water system, the warmth radiated up, making not just the building, but the entire ground surface comfortable. The goblins, who had been shivering like leaves in a hurricane moments ago, were now sprawled across the floor, cheering that the cold was gone and marveling at the sudden heat, proving that goblins consider a warm floor to be the height of luxury, right up there with not tripping over bones. Sora walked back into the treehouse and froze. The goblins were lying all over the floor in various states of bliss, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen a monster. One goblin declared he wanted to sleep on the floor forever, while another noted how nice it felt to lie on. Sora stared, her brain buffering as she tried to process how the freezing building had become warm in such a short time. Crick observed the scene with satisfaction, noting that the goblins seemed much more relaxed now, which was a significant improvement over their previous state of frantic shivering. Crick addressed the goblins, informing them that the floor heating system was made possible in no small part by the traveler, Soara. He instructed them to show her their appreciation. The goblins, realizing Soara had helped the dwarf man, immediately swarmed her with the enthusiasm of a fan club. They told her not to stand there and invited her to come sleep with them on the warm floor. Soara yelled for them to let go, but they pulled her down. As she hit the ground, she felt the warmth herself, wondering how the floor could be so nice. She lay there, her warrior training clashing with the undeniable comfort of geothermal heating, realizing that being a savage beast was actually quite cozy. A flashback revealed Sora's grueling training with her master. He told her that a warrior has no emotions and must never waver in his devotion to the kingdom. He added that a warrior has no remorse or pity for the creatures he slays. Sora struggled against him, trying to live up to these impossible standards, which apparently involved turning off all feelings like a light switch and having the emotional range of a brick. Sora was knocked to the ground by her master. He told her to stand up and not disappoint him, reminding her that her only worth lay in the skills he was giving her and that her existence was that of a weapon. He reminded her that they had taken her in when she was wandering and homeless, clothed and fed her, and asked how this was how she repaid them. Sora lay panting on the ground, realizing that her entire life had been built on being a tool, which was a harsh lesson to learn right after experiencing the joys of underfloor heating. Sora lay on the cold stone, her master's words echoing in her mind, calling her worthless. She crawled toward the gate, watching it close as happy citizens headed to a festival, completely oblivious to the emotional damage happening inside the training grounds. While families enjoyed the sunny weather, Sora was left with nothing but a bruised ego and a cold floor, proving that peace meant she didn't even get to watch the fireworks. bruised and sweating? Soara heard the command to pick up her sword. She obeyed instantly, her spirit broken but her muscle memory intact. She screamed and charged at her master again, a futile attempt to prove her worth while a happy family strolled by in the background, highlighting the stark contrast between a normal childhood and whatever torture session this was. Sora suddenly realized she had fallen asleep in the middle of a pile of goblins. She jolted awake, blushing furiously, shocked to find herself cuddling with the very creatures she was trained to destroy. It turned out the heated floor was so comfortable that even a battle-hardened warrior couldn't resist a nap, making her look less like a monster slayer and more like a kitten in a pile of yarn. Sora sat up, horrified that she had napped among the enemy.